There's a profound paradox at the heart of human transformation that most people never understand. You cannot heal what you refuse to feel, and you cannot change what you will not acknowledge. This is where two of the greatest minds in psychology and neuroscience converge: Carl Jung, who mapped the hidden territories of the unconscious mind, and Joe Dispenza, who revealed how consciousness reshapes biology. Together, they offer us something extraordinary, a complete path to healing that addresses both the darkness we've hidden and the power we've forgotten. Most approaches to personal growth make a fundamental error. They focus exclusively on the light: positive thinking, visualization, affirmations, elevated emotions. But Jung discovered something that changes everything. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You cannot heal by denying half of your reality. True transformation requires facing the shadow you've spent your lifetime avoiding. But Jung's insight is only half of the equation, because once you've acknowledged your shadow, once you've confronted the parts of yourself you've denied, disowned, and projected onto others, you need a method for actually changing the patterns that keep you trapped. This is where Dispenza's research becomes essential. He's shown us that we can literally rewire our brains, change our biology, and transform our reality through the conscious use of our minds. Let's understand what we're really talking about when we speak of the shadow. Jung didn't use this term metaphorically. He meant the actual living parts of your psyche that you've pushed into the unconscious because they didn't fit the image you wanted to maintain. Every quality you've denied in yourself, every emotion you've suppressed, every desire you've deemed unacceptable has been relegated to your shadow. But here's what most people miss. Your shadow isn't just made of negative qualities. Often our greatest gifts, our deepest passions, our most authentic desires have been pushed into shadow because they threatened our safety, our belonging, or our carefully constructed identity. The artist who became an accountant to please their parents. The leader who learned to stay small to avoid rejection. The passionate person who learned to be cool and detached to protect themselves from pain. Your shadow holds not just your darkness, but your unlived life. And according to Jung, this unlived life will haunt you until you reclaim it. As he wrote, by not being aware of having a shadow, you declare a part of your personality to be non-existent. Then it enters the kingdom of the non-existent, which swallows it up, and the less you can see it, the more you are it. This is the danger of ignoring your shadow. The parts of yourself you refuse to acknowledge don't disappear. They operate from the unconscious, sabotaging your conscious intentions, creating repeating patterns, manifesting as physical symptoms, or getting projected onto others. You see in the world what you refuse to see in yourself. Now let's bring in Dispenza's groundbreaking work. He's demonstrated through extensive research that our thoughts, emotions, and consciousness directly influence our biology. When you're unconsciously operating from shadow patterns, suppressed anger, denied grief, unacknowledged fear, these emotional states create specific chemical signatures in your body. Over time, these chemical patterns become addictive. Your body literally becomes addicted to the emotions of your shadow. This is why healing requires both shadow work and mind work. You need Jung's depth psychology to identify and integrate what's been hidden. And you need Dispenza's neuroscience to understand how to break the addiction to these old emotional patterns and create new ones. You need to make the unconscious conscious, and then you need to consciously rewire your brain. The integration of these two approaches creates a powerful healing methodology. First, you must turn toward your shadow with courage and curiosity. This means noticing the patterns in your life that keep repeating, the same relationship dynamics showing up with different people, the same career obstacles appearing in different forms, the same emotional reactions triggered by different circumstances. These patterns are your shadow signature. They're showing you exactly what needs to be integrated. But most people, when they encounter these patterns, do what Dispenza calls living in survival mode. They react automatically, fall into familiar emotional states, and reinforce the very neural pathways they want to change. Jung would say you're being possessed by your shadow. Dispenza would say you're addicted to the neurochemistry of your past. Both are describing the same phenomenon from different angles. Your unconscious patterns have become so deeply wired into your brain and body that they run automatically, and you've become chemically dependent on the emotions they generate. Breaking this cycle requires a specific process. First, you must become aware of your shadow patterns. This is Jung's invitation to observe yourself with radical honesty. When you feel that familiar surge of anger, instead of justifying it or acting on it, you pause and ask, what part of myself am I refusing to acknowledge that is creating this reaction? When you find yourself judging others harshly, you inquire, what quality am I seeing in them that I've disowned in myself? This shadow work isn't comfortable. Jung called it going through the darkness, and for good reason. As you begin to acknowledge the parts of yourself you've denied, you'll likely experience intense emotions: shame, grief, rage, fear. These are the emotions that caused you to create the shadow in the first place. You felt these feelings were too dangerous, too overwhelming, or too unacceptable to experience fully. But here's the paradox: the only way out is through. You cannot heal what you will not feel. And this is where Dispenza's work becomes invaluable. He teaches us that emotions are temporary chemical experiences that provide information. They're not who you are, they're states you're experiencing. When you can observe your emotions without becoming completely identified with them, when you can feel them fully while maintaining some witness consciousness, you create the possibility for change. Dispenza has shown that the moment you become aware of an unconscious pattern, you create a neurological gap, a space between the stimulus and your automatic response. In that gap lies your power. In that moment of awareness, you can choose differently. Instead of automatically falling into the familiar emotional pattern, you can consciously choose a new response. But choosing differently once isn't enough. Your brain has spent years, perhaps decades, wiring the old patterns. To create lasting change, you need what Dispenza calls mental rehearsal. This means consciously practicing being your new self, thinking new thoughts, generating new emotions, embodying new patterns, until these new ways of being become more automatic than the old ones. This is where Jung's shadow integration meets Dispenza's neuroplasticity. As you make the unconscious conscious, as you acknowledge and integrate your shadow, you create new self-awareness. Then you use that awareness to consciously rewire your brain through mental rehearsal and elevated emotional states. The process works like this. You identify a shadow pattern. Perhaps you've been suppressing your authentic voice because you learned early that speaking up was dangerous. Through shadow work, you acknowledge this pattern and feel the emotions associated with it. Perhaps fear of rejection, anger at having to silence yourself, grief for all the times you didn't speak your truth. Then instead of staying stuck in these emotions, or immediately trying to transcend them through spiritual bypassing, you use Dispenza's techniques to create new neural pathways. You mentally rehearse speaking your truth with confidence. You generate the elevated emotions of empowerment, authenticity, and self-respect. You practice this new way of being in your mind so thoroughly that your brain begins to fire and wire in these new patterns. But here's what makes this approach so powerful. You're not trying to create a false positive state that ignores your shadow. You're not pretending everything is fine when it's not. You're acknowledging the full truth of your experience, including the shadow, and then consciously choosing to create new patterns based on integration rather than suppression. Jung understood that the goal of psychological work isn't to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it. When you integrate your shadow, You don't become less of yourself. You become more whole. You reclaim the energy that was locked up in suppression. You access qualities and capacities that were hidden. You stop projecting your disowned parts onto others and start taking full responsibility for your own wholeness. Dispenza's research adds a crucial dimension to this understanding. He's documented that when people do this kind of deep psychological and neurological work, they don't just experience psychological shifts, they experience biological healing. Inflammatory markers decrease, immune function improves, gene expression changes. The mind-body connection that Jung intuited has now been measured and verified by modern science. The reason this happens is profound. When you're operating from unconscious shadow patterns, your body is constantly in a state of internal conflict. Part of you is trying to move forward, while another part is holding you back. Part of you wants health, while another part is attached to the chemistry of stress and survival. This internal conflict creates physiological stress that manifests as physical symptoms. But when you integrate your shadow and consciously rewire your mind, you create internal coherence. Your conscious and unconscious minds align. Your thoughts and emotions harmonize. And this internal coherence creates biological healing. Your body can finally relax out of survival mode and into a state of growth and repair. This is the true power of combining Jung's depth psychology with Dispenza's neuroscience. You're not just changing your thoughts or managing your emotions. You're fundamentally transforming who you are at every level, psychological, neurological, and biological. You're becoming integrated, coherent, and whole. But this transformation requires commitment. Shadow work isn't easy, and neurological rewiring takes time. You'll encounter resistance, both from your unconscious patterns that want to maintain the familiar, and from your body that's chemically addicted to your old emotional states. Dispenza says it takes about 60 to 90 days of consistent practice to create lasting neurological change. Jung might say it takes a lifetime to fully individuate. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Some patterns shift quickly once you bring them into consciousness and start working with them. Others have deeper roots and require more sustained attention. But here's what both Jung and Dispenza would agree on. The journey of healing and transformation is not optional if you want to live an authentic, empowered, healthy life. Your shadow will not go away because you ignore it. Your old neural patterns will not disappear just because you wish they would. But when you have the courage to face your darkness and the discipline to consciously reshape your mind, you gain access to a level of transformation that most people never experience. You move from being unconsciously controlled by your past to consciously creating your future. You shift from reacting automatically to responding consciously. You transform from being fragmented and conflicted to being integrated and whole. And as you do this internal work, your external reality begins to shift in ways that seem almost miraculous, but are actually the natural result of healing at the deepest levels. Jung spoke of this transformation as individuation, becoming who you truly are beneath all the masks and defenses. Dispenza describes it as breaking the habit of being yourself, shedding the old identity that's been keeping you stuck. Both are pointing to the same profound truth. You have the capacity to heal and transform at levels most people never imagined possible. But this capacity remains dormant until you activate it through conscious choice and committed practice. You must be willing to turn toward your shadow rather than running from it. You must be willing to sit with uncomfortable emotions rather than automatically seeking distraction or relief. You must be willing to consciously practice new ways of thinking, feeling, and being, even when your body is screaming for the familiar chemistry of your old patterns. This is the hero's journey that Jung mapped and that Dispenza has made practical through modern science. It's not easy, but it's absolutely possible. And the rewards extend far beyond symptom relief or surface-level change. When you heal your shadow and transform your mind, You don't just solve problems, you become a fundamentally different person living in a fundamentally different reality. You discover capacities you didn't know you had. You access wisdom that was hidden beneath your defenses. You experience a sense of wholeness and authenticity that no external achievement can provide. Most importantly, you become free. Free from the unconscious patterns that were running your life, free from the chemical addiction to old emotions, free to consciously create rather than unconsciously repeat. This is the promise of integrating Jung's psychological wisdom with Dispenza's neuroscientific methodology. It's not a quick fix or a simple technique. It's a complete approach to transformation that honors both the depth of your unconscious and the power of your conscious mind. It acknowledges that healing requires facing what's hidden while actively creating what's possible. If you're ready to begin this journey, know that you're not embarking on a path of denial or spiritual bypassing. You're committing to a process of radical honesty, courageous feeling, and disciplined practice. You're choosing to become whole rather than remaining fragmented, to become conscious rather than staying reactive, to become integrated rather than living in conflict with yourself. The power to heal has always been within you. Your shadow holds the keys to your unlived life. Your mind holds the capacity to rewire itself completely. Together, shadow integration and conscious neurological rewiring create the conditions for transformation at every level of your being. The only question is, are you ready to claim this power and do the work that genuine healing requires? If this message has awakened something in you, if you recognize yourself in these patterns and feel called to begin the journey of healing your shadow and transforming your mind, then write in the comments, "I am ready to become whole." Share this with someone who needs to know that true healing is possible when we have the courage to face our darkness and the discipline to reshape our minds. Your journey to wholeness begins now. Will you take the first step?